So we're going to talk about progressive anti-Zionism and the poisonous legacy of Cold War hatred, the language of Soviet propaganda. So first off, let's start here. So Soviet anti-Zionism. And this is Wikipedia. This is leftist, right? This is not like a right-wing thing. This is leftist, right? There's absolutely a left-wing bias on Wikipedia. What do they say? Soviet anti-Zionism. And by the way, because there's a left-wing bias, I mean, they're going to avoid doing anything that would put the Soviets in a bad light if they can get away with it. Soviet anti-Zionism is an anti-Zionist and pro-Arab doctrine promulgated in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. While the Soviet Union initially pursued a pro-Zionist policy after World War II due to its perception that the Jewish state would be socialist and pro-Soviet, its outlook on the Arab-Israeli conflict changed as Israel began to develop a close relationship with the United States and aligned itself with the Western Bloc. So immediately you see a geopolitical reason for anti-Zionist, anti-Israel propaganda, right? And so this kind of throws a bit of a wrench in the works that there's a giant Jewish conspiracy, like Marxist Jewish conspiracy, because here you have the only country they have rejected communism. They went capitalist. They went, liberal democracy, which I think is kind of an important point. All right, let's move on to here. The Soviet Union indeed engaged in an anti-Semitic propaganda campaign that targeted the United States, among other regions, with the aim of influencing perceptions, including those of academics, against Israel. Yeah, they really went for the academics for everything, for every, destabilizing, demoralizing idea, for every idea weapon, idea pathogen to use in their propaganda war and their active measures war, their ideological war. Of course, the best place to go is the academics, academia, because they're just going to pump it out. It just becomes this self-renewing thing, right? They just recruit new, younger people, and then they go in and they just, eventually you have what you have now, which is 450 psychology professors that are, Marxist compared to one conservative. Soviet propaganda. The Soviet Union used various forms of media, including books, newspapers, and radio broadcasts, to disseminate anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda. They framed Zionism as a form of racism. Tell me if any of this is sounding familiar. Imperialism and colonialism, often drawing parallels between Israel and South Africa's apartheid regime. This was done to appeal not only to the Arab world, but to sway opinion in the West, including among academics. So what do they say again? They say it's a form of racism, imperialism, and colonialism. It's all the same shit. They just use the same stuff on everything they don't like. Like, we've seen the pattern, have we not? All right, let's move on to here. The language of Soviet propaganda. This is an article from Quillette. Okay, the claim that Israel is committing a genocide against Palestinians is among the longest-running lies told about Israel. Genocide, Israeli style. Zionist engineered genocide. The final solution of the Palestinian question. These may look like snippets from some recent campus proclamation. Of course they do. But they are not. They appeared in a Soviet pamphlet titled Zionists Count on Terror, published in 1984. What an apt year for it to be published, by Novosti, a Soviet foreign propaganda arm masquerading as a news agency. This pocket-sized brochure was meant to promote the Soviet view of Israel and Zionism to English language audiences. So there is the pamphlet. It's a real pamphlet. What's this? Novosti was a Soviet foreign propaganda agency that produced pamphlets and other materials to promote the Soviet Union's views and policies. Let's see. The pamphlet used the words genocide, terror, racist over 300 times. That's from Zionists Count on Terror. English-speaking readers around the world were meant to understand that Zionists were genocidal and racist settler colonialists. Does any of this sound familiar? English speakers around the world were meant to understand that Zionists were genocidal and racist settler colonialists who deployed Nazi methods in the service of global imperialism while suppressing the anti-colonial national liberation struggle of Palestinian people. Does any of this sound familiar to anyone? It's all the same shit that the far left uses on everything. It's all the same. It's the exact same language. Like, there's a reason the far left uses the same language to describe Israel, and often seeming actually to just be talking about Jews in general, as they use to describe every Western country and European people. You know, genocidal, racist, settler, colonialist, right? This is because the language all comes from the same place. Soviet active measures propaganda. Yuri Bezmenov told us all about this stuff.
Is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Let's see, isn't this 40-year-old Soviet propaganda pamphlet speaking the language of today's progressives? It is. It's exactly the same shit. This is the zombie propaganda from the Soviet Union, right? They planted the seed, and then it just has grown on its own. It just took over. It's an idea pathogen, right? Leftism, wokeism, this is all just the same stuff, right? Progressivism, wokeism, it's a mind virus. Or to be more precise, today's progressives are speaking the language of Soviet propaganda. Again, Yuri Bezmenov told us all about this stuff, right? He warned us all about this stuff. It just persists. Zombie anti-Zionism from Isabella Tabarovsky. This is from Tablet magazine. Those who try to explain the contemporary left's anti-Israel derangement by pointing to the latest academic fashions, such as critical race theory and intersectionality, or to specific news events of the day, often miss the point that the precise language used by the anti-Israel left today to condemn the Jewish state has been a conventional part of left-wing discourse for decades, and that it originated in the USSR. So you've got critical race theory and interest. That's all just built on the foundation that Soviet propaganda built, right? That's all just been erected on the foundations of the original propaganda, of the original terrible ideas. The extraordinary fidelity with which the progressives reproduce the ancient tropes and warped logic of Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda, complete with specific fictions and terms of abuse, raise questions. How is it that such a multitude of groups across the globe, from all manner of communists and Trotskyists to non-aligned political figures, non-communist New Left, Pan-Africans, and Cuban revolutionaries, adopted this language so completely and simultaneously? The answer is that they followed Moscow, which targeted them all with a colossal anti-Zionist campaign, pushing out masses of printed matter, communicating these ideas in multilingual radio broadcasts, and using media and diplomatic channels to influence opinions within countries. Quote here, the zombie-like repetition of state-sponsored propaganda from a dead empire explains why the anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist prattle of today's college students feels like deja vu. It's all the same shit. All right. Let's see. Cold War dynamics. During the Cold War, anti-Semitism was occasionally exploited as part of a broader anti-Western propaganda. The Soviet Union portrayed Israel, which had strong ties to the United States, as an imperialist proxy. This narrative painted Jews and Zionists as part of an international conspiracy against the Soviet state. Geopolitical. Right? Geopolitically important, allied with the United States. It's the Cold War. There's tons of propaganda flying around, trying to undermine each side, trying to undermine the other, and not worrying too much about being ethical about it. Let's see. I want to show you something else here. Hold on. So this is from a CIA document. All right, let's go to the top here. This is from 1971. Intelligence Memorandum. Soviet reactionaries hating Jews and loving Stalin, 1971. Okay, so we're going to talk about Czechoslovakia now. What happened in Czechoslovakia in 1968? On August 20, 1968, the Soviet Union led Warsaw Pact troops in an invasion of Czechoslovakia to crack down on reformist trends in Prague. Okay, what follows that? This was written in 1971, this memorandum. The Soviet hand in propagating anti-Semitic themes in Czechoslovakia is also revealed in the December publication by the Slovak Pravda publishing house in Bratislava of Beware Zionism. The book, written by two Soviets, Yuri Ivanov and Yevseyev, who has been described as a paranoid anti-Semite, is a vicious attack on Zionism for anti-Soviet activity and for instigation of the Czechoslovak reforms. The new book is actually a revised version of Ivanov's book bearing the same title that was first published in the USSR in March 1969 and reissued in May 1970 in a press run of 200,000, significantly larger than the 1969 edition. The May edition, like the recent Slovak one, was updated and included a more direct implication of Zionism in the Czechoslovak reforms, as well as in events in Hungary in 1956 and the Polish Spring of 1968. The publication of the book in Czechoslovakia coincides with increasing exhortation in the Soviet Union on the need for vigilance and anti-Zionist propaganda. Okay, so you're starting to get a picture now of the Soviet Union's relationship to all of this, to the word Zionism, right? They were using it. It was important geopolitically. It was important internally because they would use it as a scapegoat for dissent, right? And it was important from a foreign propaganda, from the active measures propaganda aspect as well, the demoralization of the West, because it fits in perfectly into the oppressed oppressor zero-sum game narrative that we see adopted by by progressives, the progressive left, by the woke everywhere in the West. Right? It fits in perfectly. Oppressed oppressor. Again, you could just take Zionist out and replace it with Christian, and it works just fine for any woke person, for any Marxist professor. They're just as happy with both, right? Because it's all the same shit, and it all comes from the same damn place. Again, Yuri Bezmenov told us about all of this. Soviet propaganda, demoralization. This is what it is. So if anybody wants to know my feelings on all of this, right, this is it. I've just given you a great explanation in detail. This is what I think. So when I see the lunatics, screaming death to Zionists and death to Canada and blah, I recognize it's all the same shit and it comes from the same place. That's why I have no time for it. Right? I'm not woke, right? So I don't like it. I don't like woke ideology. I don't accept their oppressed oppressor zero-sum ideology. To me, it just is obviously all the same shit. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. Please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribing really helps me out. I thank you for that. I will see you next time.